mixed with some of the technology transfers. So that 10,000 acres, based on the Global City Initiative studies that JT was mentioning, shows that Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, and other counties in the state have this manufacturing potential. It creates, that's why in the inland port feasibility study, we're talking about in and out. In is what we import, out is what we produce here and export. So for a port to succeed in a state to have a balanced economy, a city to have a balanced economy, you import and export. So I-80 and I-15 are really, really critical. There's no other place in the country where you have an east-west and north-south interstate. So we read about this every day. These are the store closures for this year. These are staggering numbers of store closures. So we're just talking about e-commerce. If every city was worried about a regional mall being built and then Walmart coming along, look at this wave that's coming. So it's a wave, and there's a way that Salt Lake City can capture what's happening. These are, mall owners are trying to figure out, these are the best locations in America. Cottonwood Mall is a fabulous location. Each of the malls are some of the best real estate in America because oftentimes the mall came and transportation infrastructure was built around them. But malls are going away at unprecedented levels. You can, and these are Wall Street Journal almost every day. So look at the new job market that's coming. So when we talk about manufacturing job, we kind of had Bernie on the left and Trump supporters, especially the young millennials on the right, thinking they're uncomfortable about the future and where are they going, education or vocational. We can capture both in the Northwest Quadrant if we can get this right. That's why this is a really big picture. So the new jobs of the future are manufacturing jobs, but they're not in a mine, and they're not chopping down forests, and they're not going to be bringing ore out of the ground or making ore. They're really out in the Northwest Quadrant. That's why this is a really big picture, and I think it's what the speaker sees.
Sorry to rush you along, Steve, but we actually have the slides
so
for
here
the
you
articles.
Go. So here's the next thing I'll tell you. I own no ground in the Northwest Quadrant. I'm not one of the landowners. I own buildings, over 30 buildings, and we have 87 tenants that are growing. So we don't have land in this Northwest Quadrant that we're talking about, but the Northwest Quadrant's actually bigger. It's west of I-15 and north of SR 201, and that's the area that we're talking about. So within that area, we have 100 million feet of existing industrial, and that industrial must link, it must connect. It has to work with the rest of the supply chain and these new ports. So for example, the Salt Lake City master plan, those roads for a true inland port and the kind of generation of trade that we need, of imports, exports, logistics, has to be much larger. The roads have to be wider, there have to be more capacity, because what we don't want is a silicon slopes. We don't want to have the pinch point like we're having right now at Lehigh happening in the Northwest Quadrant. That's why we wanted to kind of get ahead of this. I can't take credit for any of this, really for much of it, but Kyle, and we've worked together since really 1998, attends more conferences and works with more tenants and has master planned 4,000 acres, as big as the Northwest Quadrant, for other developers in the Northwest Quadrant. And so we've worked together and we've seen this wave coming. I saw the mall wave, we saw e-commerce, and then we saw the inland port study, and we saw Delta's commitment to this city, but there's something bigger that's happening. So hopefully that brings each of you kind of up to speed with what I think is happening, this opportunity, why I think this is such a big idea, I think why the speaker's so excited, why others are, because there's this wave that's coming, and we have a simple choice. Inland Port Study 1990, do nothing, plan roads, continue to develop more industrial, we'll build buildings and we'll all be just fine. Or look at strategy, so this is a product, not a project. The Inland Port's a project, building roads are a project. This is a product that this council, the mayor, Laura, GOED, EDCU, the state of Utah, Salt Lake County can market to bring jobs, create jobs. If you're here with a business, let's keep you here. If you're not, who's a key supplier that we can bring here? Because otherwise, trucks, road, and rail are just going to pass us by. They go by full, they come back empty.
Thank you, Steve. Kyle?
Yeah, so just two thoughts. As I was listening to the conversation earlier, it dawned on me that we may be having two conversations at once. One is the master plan, the use plan, the CRA agreement that was struck with the developers for that portion of the Northwest Quadrant, and then we have a conversation about a port. Councilman Kitchens mentioned that we ought not to kind of choke the speed of business while we're trying to figure out the governance of a port. At least I inferred that from the comment, and we ought to proceed with the good work that was done there. I've looked at the plan. I think it's got every chance for success. The market's starved for dirt, and there are users that want to come here. But as I listened to the discussion about port, one of the things that struck me is we do have 100 million square feet of standing inventory in the Northwest Quadrant. If you take the entire square footage that could be built out, just rough math, on the acreage that we've discussed today in the domain that would be the 4,000 plus or minus acres, that supports roughly 60 million feet, plus or minus on just quick back of the napkin development math. So you have all of the existing transportation infrastructure that's in the Northwest Quadrant has been relatively untouched for the entirety of my career out there. It's almost 22 years. I think the point that Steve is making relative to ensuring connectedness speaks to the scale of the project and the need for stakeholders, user stakeholders, and others to be involved. We've heard from developers today. We've heard from people on the Hill and here, but conspicuously absent from the conversation are the people that actually use the stuff that come in and out of the port. I think that's a miss. If we want to get it right, and we want ultimately to have it be a long-term generational asset that's going to drive economic development for the next 50 years, then we need to be having discussions with the existing users that are in our market that want to expand, but for having a facility like this. We listened to development of a need. Adam Wasserman talked about creating a business plan. I don't know how you create a business plan unless you identify what the market is. I mean, that's step one, right? And we have a huge existing marketplace today where we don't have the capacity or an existing piece of infrastructure that can allow users to take advantage of the four modalities that were talked about. And that is a key differentiator for site selectors. I do this all over the country for 4 or 5 tenants. And one of the constant questions is proximity to rail. And then once you find that proximity, both rail and air, you have to be able to get into and out of the facility. So if you end up, think about it like a heart. If you've got a heart that's pumping blood and you add that heart as the port, and you have all of the capillaries and veins that feed that heart that are outside of the site of the heart, if those aren't increased in capacity, the heart's going to die, and it will fail. There has to be some focus on additional infrastructure and the supporting infrastructure on the roads that are existing. 5600 West is at a failure point. You have, California Avenue that has 2 lanes that haven't been widened next to Cannon Pioneer Landfill. All of those things are users that presumably would take advantage of the port. If you have a constricted ability to get to and from that fantastic facility, it won't be utilized. And why not grow our own? I mean, Utah's great at that. We ought to continue that trend, and we ought to figure out how to get those stakeholders to the table and determine how best they see utilization of that facility as the conversation keeps going.
Thank you, Kyle.
Each of you in a very rare and unique situation. There was an addendum that each of you didn't read, but you know about. The day you were elected, you're each an architect, an AIA. You're an AIA of the future. And there are really 2 stories. And it's really a decision that has to be made. Do we move forward and really look at that developed and undeveloped area, because we can't forget about what exists, and take that area and develop a product to really market, or do we just open up roads and build buildings? Because we'll all look back whenever our day is done, and that's whenever that is, and say, here was the greatest opportunity. And Ben McAdams says this, the mayor says this, the connection of the railroad opened up Salt Lake City, Utah, the West, because before that day, and that 150th anniversary is next year, we were getting here on hand carts. That opened up the movement of people, and then the next year, Gold, Sutter's Fort, 1848, opened up the entire West. Then we had the Olympics. It put us on the rail map. You'll hear about an announcement tomorrow. It's big, it's epic. And it changes Utah's future because it focuses the world here, however 26 and 2030 work out. But this is a choice. Do we continue doing what we've done for the last 150 years, or do we look at that land mass that's left and master plan this working together with the city taking the lead on each and everything that has to happen? It has to happen that way, to craft and create a future that doesn't exist. So that's why each of you are architects. We're just a voice in the choir, and hopefully we continue to be in the choir.
Thank you for bringing us a global perspective to the state painting the opportunity landscape locally, but you have illuminated, as you do every time I talk to you, the worldwide landscape of the evolution of warehousing, of logistics. When I was elected, I remember you sent me 6 or 8 articles stapled together. There were so many I had to take them on a plane with me and read them all at once over 3 hours of flying. You've been talking about this for a very long time because you know this very well, and you are helping guide the worldwide component that we are looking to fill. I don't think you have to convince us, Steve, that this is an incredible opportunity that we want to be a part of. It's a matter of how is the city a partner in this and a willing participant in this. And Kyle, thank you for highlighting that we need to bring stakeholders that are existing in our Northwest Quadrant today into these conversations, and also at the state level as well. You both do a lot for our city, and I appreciate you coming to speak with us today.
Thank you.
And to move it along, I'm sorry, but the Utah League of Cities and Towns, Cameron Deal, is here, the director, to speak with us. So, council members, I forgot to ask if you have any questions for, are you okay that we keep on schedule and move along here? Mr. Deal, come on up. And if you have, do you have anyone else with you today? Great. Thank you for joining us. Not only is your time precious on the Hill, but we understand you have a new baby at home, so it's
Correct.
doubly precious.
Yes, that's correct. She's
Thank
1
you
week
for
old today.
being with us this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure.
Will you pull that mic way up to you?
Yep, that's perfect. My pleasure, and thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the Salt Lake City Council, for the opportunity to address you today. And thank you for the opportunity to be here over the last couple of hours and hear the presentation from legislative leadership about the Port Authority concept that was first dropped in discussion last week. Madam Chair, Councilmember Luke, and Councilmember Kitchen were at the meeting last week, along with Mayor Biskupski. With legislative leadership, I was there, as well as several other members of League staff, as we started this stage of the conversation. My objective today here is to give you more detail about the MIDA model, the Military Installation Development Authority. There have been multiple questions that have been asked within League membership, as well as from Salt Lake City, about what MIDA is and how MIDA operates. During the meeting last week at the Capitol, the Speaker of the House referenced MIDA several times as a potential model for whatever could take place in the Northwest Quadrant. You heard that again today during his presentation. My hope is to be able to answer whatever questions you have about the history of MIDA, the jurisdiction of MIDA, and the authority of MIDA. I'm also prepared, it's not in the PowerPoint, but just based on the discussion from the last couple of hours, if you have any questions about the point of the Mountain Commission, because the point of the Mountain Commission is dramatically different than MIDA, with different authorities and different membership. So if there are questions there, I'm happy to discuss that. In this first slide, I actually pulled this slide from the League conference this past April in St. George. And the reason I'm starting with this is because for the last almost year, ever since Senate Bill 278 came out on the final day of the session last year, we have been prepping our membership about a potential state action in the Northwest Quadrant of Salt Lake. We have talked about the conflict that occurs when you have local government and state government and the inherent tension that takes place when there's different visions for what an area should look like. We've talked with our membership, including several of you and much of your staff, about this inherent tension when you have state infrastructure meeting that local vision or the local planning. Over the last 9 months, for example, the League has been actively involved, and I've been the point person on SB 136, which was in the Senate Transportation Committee yesterday. Our Legislative Policy Committee yesterday actually took a vote, and Salt Lake City's representatives were there, to support SB 136 after 9 months of negotiation. And that bill will better integrate local land use and economic development potential with state transportation infrastructure. I bring that up because you heard during the last couple of hours from legislative leadership frustration about incidents that have happened in years past when there's been a disconnect between local land use and state transportation. Our hope is that SB 136 is the blueprint to better integrate state transportation planning with local land use, and it's supported by the League, and again, we worked on that for 9 months to get that bill to an appropriate position where all stakeholders could support it. Madam Chair, you mentioned 22,000 acres over the course of the last couple of hours. The reason you'll see the 3,670 highlighted here is this came from a KSL report last spring that I used as part of the presentation to the league membership to set the stage for what could happen in the Northwest Quadrant going forward. So that's not my number. That was the number that was reported before. Point of the Mountain, you'll see that the Point of the Mountain Commission actually encompasses 10 cities. So it's not just the 690 acres within Draper City, but it also is the cities that abut Draper and go into 2 counties, both Utah County and Salt Lake County. And again, if you have questions about how that is constituted, I'm happy to address those.
May I jump in?
But fire away.
Are those equal votes? Is it a voting member board?
It is a voting member board, and it is a 15-member board, of which 4 are city representatives. By statute, Draper and Lehigh both have representation, and then the league actually appoints 2 additional city mayors to sit on the Point of the Mountain Commission. We made the decision to appoint 1 person from Salt Lake County and 1 person from a city in Utah County. The other 11 positions are either appointed by the governor, appointed by the House Speaker, appointed by the Senate President, come from GOED, or come from EDC Utah. And it encompasses private stakeholders, public residents, school districts, GOED, EDC Utah, and a variety of stakeholders. Of the 10 cities that are within that jurisdiction, again, only 4 of them have representation on the Point of the Mountain Commission. And while I'm referencing the Point of the Mountain Commission, it's important to note when you look at the statutory authorization for the Point of the Mountain Commission, the final line in the code is the Commission's recommendations under this section are advisory only. So it does not have tax authority, it does not have land use authority. The Point of the Mountain Commission is to evaluate, study, prepare, and make recommendations for the future planning and development of the Point of the Mountain area. So again, radically different than the MIDA model, which I'll jump into in more detail. At the September League Conference, and there were several representatives from Salt Lake City there, the League membership unanimously supported this resolution. And I wanted to preface the discussion about MIDA with this resolution. The author of the resolution was actually Lynn Pace in his capacity as council member in Holiday, but it again was endorsed unanimously by the League membership in September. Now, therefore, we, the members of the Utah League of Cities and Towns, resolve that, 1, cities and towns within the state of Utah commit that they are willing and ready to collaborate and partner with the state, the business community, and other stakeholders to pursue a broad range of future economic development opportunities, including those in proximity to state transportation infrastructure. So you can see that that paragraph really was the backbone for what turned into SB 136 on state transportation, and also demonstrated the readiness of local governments around the state to collaborate with the state of Utah in preparing for future economic growth. Part 2, which is highlighted in orange, says cities and towns cannot support development proposals, task forces, commissions, districts, development authorities, or other legislation that would deprive local municipalities of their traditional local land use authority on private property, or deprive them of control of tax increment generated within their jurisdiction without their consent. Then the last line is for us to distribute this information to legislators, which we have done since that September conference. So with that as a background and as a backdrop, let's jump into the Military Installation Development Authority, which is now a decade old. MIDA is an independent entity under state law. It is a political subdivision. In a way, it is a quasi-city. It is not a city, but it is a quasi-city with many of the same authorities that a city has. And then there are some authorities it does not have. MIDA is governed by a board. Senator Jerry Stevenson answered a question, actually I believe it was from you, Madam Chair, when you asked who the board is accountable to in MIDA, and the board is accountable back to the appointing entities. So the MIDA board consists of 7 voting members and then as many non-voting members as they see fit. And those 7 voting members, 5 of which are appointed by the governor, and then within those 5, there's a statutory stipulation that 3 of them must be mayors of adjacent areas to the MIDA authority. So you'll see that the membership of MIDA currently is Senator Jerry Stevenson, Senator Stuart Adams, Clearfield Mayor Mark Shepard, Bluffdale Mayor Dirk Timothy, former Roy Mayor Joe Ritchie, and the reason it's the former Roy Mayor is I've been unable to ascertain who took former Mayor Ritchie's spot. Director of Veterans and Military Affairs, Gary Harder. GOA Deputy Director, Ben Hart, Mike Ostermiller. I pulled this membership from MIDA's website, and that's why I've been unable to determine who took the former mayor's place in Roy. One appointed by the Senate President, one appointed by the Speaker of the House, and in fiscal year 2017, they had a budget of $3.8 million. So what does MIDA do? How is MIDA a quasi-city? MIDA is authorized by statute to exercise police power, to enter into lease agreements, to collect fees and taxes of all sorts. In fact, that should also say sales tax, that they are authorized to collect sales tax. What's interesting, though, about sales tax, and I'll get to this in the next slide, is that they are authorized to collect the point of sale piece, but because there are no permanent residents within MIDA territories, they don't get any of the population piece. Sales tax for local purposes being split 50% point of sale, 50% population. They don't have any of that population component because there are no residents within the MIDA authority. They can borrow money and they have bond authority. The project area is not subject to LUDMA under state law and is not subject to local land use zoning. It's not subject to any sort of local ordinances like business license, franchise, and health. They are not allowed, MIDA is not allowed to provide police and fire coverage. That is one key distinction between MIDA and a city. Instead, state law requires them to contract with a neighboring political subdivision in order to provide police and fire. MIDA also does not have zoning authority. So that is actually how MIDA does not run afoul of the state constitution, in that it does not have zoning authority, but it is exempt from zoning and exempt from LUDMA under state law. Interesting to note is that the project area of MIDA shall include military land, shall include that federally owned land, but it also may include private land. So it has to have the federal piece, and then it can pick up the private land that is adjacent to the federally owned land. This is how a MIDA project gets funded. Hopefully you can follow this graph, but MIDA is funded through property tax, sales tax, and other types of taxes, some of which goes into the development fund that provides the development and infrastructure. Infrastructure within a MIDA property can occur both within the land in the MIDA authority as well as beyond the fence. That's the term that's used particularly up in Falcon Hill, which is was the first MIDA property. So you have infrastructure that's inside the fence on Hill Air Force Base property, as well as improvements that have taken place outside of the fence. Then you have the municipal services revenue there that you can see is how MIDA provides municipal services to the MIDA properties, including contracting with political subdivisions for police and fire protection. So what are the MIDA projects then around the state? Falcon Hill is the most prominent one. The map you see in your materials and behind me is a map of the Falcon Hill project, which is outlined in yellow. The different colors around the yellow outline are the 4 cities that abut MIDA properties. Those 4 cities are Roy, Riverdale, Sunset, and Clearfield. MIDA has its origin in what is known as enhanced use leasing under federal law. And this was an attempt to take advantage of underutilized federally owned lands and lease them out for private development and commercialize them for a period of time of 50 years. MIDA is authorized under state law. The enhanced use leasing is authorized under federal law. And the MIDA authorization is not tied to the same 50-year requirement as the enhanced use leasing. Falcon Hill consists of 550 acres on the gates of Hill Air Force Base up in northern Utah. And it's actually the largest enhanced use leasing in the United States. Half of it is developed by Woodbury Corporation, the other half by Hunt Corporation. Now, there are additional MIDA facilities that have taken root over the last few years. For example, on the other side of Hill Air Force Base, you have a MIDA project known as the Runway at Eastgate. The Bluffdale NSA facility is governed by MIDA, and the infrastructure and improvements that were put in place to facilitate that development are governed by MIDA. Then there is now a military recreation facility that will be built adjacent to Deer Valley, and the 6-acre lot within that overall development next to Deer Valley is also operated by MIDA.
Cam, can I interrupt you?
Absolutely.
I'm not looking for an answer, but I can't help but wonder if what Senator Stevenson may be looking at is an adjustment to the existing MIDA mechanism that requires federally owned land or military land, or it forces us to look at what federally owned land is proximal to the Northwest Quadrant area. And the only piece I can think of is within the airport.
I don't want to speak for the senator. It's entirely possible as they're talking about MIDA, they're mainly talking about the governance piece rather than the legal requirements under federal law that facilitate MIDA. But that is an unanswered question, as when we hear the reference to MIDA, what specifically does that entail?
Thank you.
MIDA, again, its core is to provide a one-stop shop for municipal services and to facilitate the development of this underutilized land. I found data on the legislature's website about state appropriations to MIDA between 2008 and 2014. That was the most updated information that I could find in preparation for this presentation. And the legislature's appropriated during that time frame $20.89 million to MIDA. MIDA had issued $2.5 million in tax increment bonds, and then these were the projects that were built between 2008 and 2014. These would predate the Eastgate project on the east side of Hill Air Force Base, as well as the project in Wasatch County. I am unsure if this would predate the project at NSA and the infrastructure that was put in there in Bluffdale. This is a list of the different federal projects that MIDA has expressed interest in potentially partnering for enhanced use leasing. These take place around the state. You can see Fort Douglas, the Salt Lake Air Base was highlighted. This came from a MIDA presentation to an interim committee in October of 2014. The interesting one on just the west side of the state, not the northwest quadrant, but the west side of the state on the West Desert, is MIDA is looking into some potential geothermal development out there as part of the test and training range. But that's a list of their presentation in 2014 of different potential projects. This last slide was an attempt to take what we heard last week from legislative leadership about the Crossroads of the West Port Authority proposal and highlight the key quotes that came from both Senator Stevenson and Speaker Hughes, and then reference the 9 members that they put forward, recognizing that that is still in flux, and certainly what was presented today is slightly different than what the 9 members were presented last week. But you have this 9-member authority, which is different than that 7-member authority of MIDA or the 15-member authority of the Point of the Mountain Commission.
Nice work, Cam. We made a big ask of you, really, I think, just late last week to have you come today, give up your time on the Hill and at home, and give us basically a third-party snapshot of MIDA in Utah, and you've done a great job of that. Council members, do you have any questions for Mr. Deal, or any thoughts about what we've just heard?
Madam Chair, if I can add just one last comment. Yesterday, at the League Legislative Policy Committee, I gave a high-level presentation about what happened last Thursday to the members of the LPC. We had multiple cities who raised concerns about what the precedent would be in the Northwest Quadrant and how it would relate to the Point of the Mountain Commission, Mountain View Corridor, or any other area around the state where there might be economic development potential. I heard that comment come up by several of you during your discussion with House and Senate leadership, and I want you to know that other cities are watching and are sharing the concerns of what it could mean going forward. There was no vote taken yesterday because there is no bill. We have updated our policies and procedures at the League to where we take positions once legislation goes public, and at this point there's no legislation. So the effort yesterday was to give that high-level presentation. Certainly invite any members of the council to join us at LPC as this progresses, to give presentations when a bill does become public.
Thank you. Council members, anything? Mr. Deal, thank you for being with us and for representing us as a partner with the Utah League of Cities and Towns. Our work is not done.
Yes, not at all.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
We're 5 minutes ahead of schedule, administration, but you're next on our agenda. Do you mind coming up early? Of course, we have Mayor Biskupski with us. Laura Fritz is on my list. Mayor, you can bring up whoever you'd like. I also have Danny Walls
Laura,
and
Danny,
Tammy Hunsaker.
Amy,
There's mics for
the
everyone.
A-team. Thank
What a
you.
day.
Yes. But I think the fact-finding and I think all of that was very helpful. So you pointed out how we really need to be figuring this out together, and we do. And I do want to start by just saying thank you for working so well with the administration. This has been very empowering for us as a city, and I'm very grateful for the partnership. I also want to say thank you to the state legislature for partnering with us on the homeless situation in this city, and they have shown up in a very strong and proactive way to help us really move the needle and move how we provide services in a much more effective manner. And the time and attention that they have given to that issue has been critical. So I'm very grateful to them for that. I think what we are realizing today is there still is no clear boundaries around what this entity would govern, and that this is bigger than an inland port, and the importance of understanding exactly what it is that we will be creating, and the importance of getting that right so that the governance structure works the way it needs to and should. So I'm very grateful for all of the testimony today, the questions that you asked, the points that you made. I think were all very helpful. So I want to turn some time over to Lara and her team and have them kind of walk through the work we've done and what could be coming down the pipe.
And before you begin, I appreciate that you've put together a presentation, and yet you're at the end here of a really informative work session so far. So this is an iterative process that we are in, and you've worked very quickly, even since consistently, but especially since Thursday, to put something to show us together. So feel free to illuminate whatever opportunities you've seen today that aren't perhaps captured in what you're about to show us.
Thank you, Councilwoman, or Council Chair Mendenhall. What a pleasure. We're really proud of the work that's been done over the last year and a half. I want to be very clear. We've talked about development agreements and CRAs, and you're going to hear about that again today. But this really has been a year and a half worth of work by the city. And what I thought would be valuable is to have Danny and Tammy walk through the timeline that we have been through over the past year and a half. And then we want to talk a little bit about where we think we can go from here. So with that, I'll turn it over to Danny and Tammy.
And with the timeline, it's actually the timeline out of the booklet that you all should have, and we have copies here for the public if needed. Yes.
Yeah, pull it closer.
If you couldn't hear Tammy, there is a paper copy for everyone in the audience who would like one of these. Raise your hand if you'd like, and we can have staff run it around to you. Or Lance Bolin.
Or Lance. Lance is a real partner.
Real partnerships at work here.
Wants to stand up for a while.
Thank you. Go ahead, Tammy.
You're up. You got it.
Well, so this timeline was actually in a booklet, a citywide kind of effort, a communication piece that we recently put together on the Northwest Quadrant. And it really outlines not just what economic development and RDA has done, but really the larger citywide effort for development in the Northwest Quadrant. And this really started when the prison site selection occurred in the Northwest Quadrant. We immediately sprung into action, and community and neighborhoods in the planning division immediately started working on adopting a master plan, which through a lengthy public outreach process and coordination process was adopted in August of 2016. The RDA and economic development kind of coordinated efforts with that, and we adopted a resolution, or you actually adopted a resolution authorizing the boundaries of a study area for the Northwest Quadrant also in 2016. And that process to get that area adopted just this month actually included a lot of public outreach. We had 7 different stakeholder roundtable groups. The state was there, the county was there. We had environmental groups there, the property owners, industrial property brokers. So we actually touched on 100 different individual stakeholders. And so that was a process that was a long time coming, and resulted in the adoption of the CRA and the development agreements. But all of this work that the RDA and economic development's done really just fed on the work that was completed by the Department of Public Utilities, on the Transportation Division, planning. There's been a lot of boots on the ground, so to speak, in coordinating this effort, and a lot of work that's gone into this that we don't want lost, that we feel is valuable. Danny, do you have anything to add to the timeline?
Not to the timeline, but I'll add something at the end.
Sure. So, well, part 2 of the timeline, I mean, you know the efforts that have gone on recently. We're working on final zoning amendments, and the zoning that was put in place was done with a lot of public outreach that Tracy Tran and Nick Norris from the Planning Division led, and it would be, we just feel that it's the appropriate zoning for the area, and that will allow for economic development and the inland port to be implemented as process and development continues. And resulting in all of this, you know, the next step really is that cooperative partnership. We in the RDA know that the plan was adopted, and Salt Lake City's the participating taxing entity right now, but we can't do it alone, and we're working to get the county on board, other taxing entities, the school district. Preliminary discussions have begun, and we know that, you know, further steps need to be taken as immediate as possible. So we're excited to continue with this collaborative development of the Northwest Quadrant and actually see our hard work get implemented.
Tammy touched on what I was going to say, so I'm going to defer my comments to be more of a setup for Laura now, which is basically to expand on first what Tammy said is there's still a lot of work to do. If you recall in our conversations with you regarding the plan as well as the agreements with the developers, is that was just the first step. It still requires a lot of work of looking at the site, working with the developers on what their plan and vision and strategy is for actual development. And all of that information will come back to not only the RDA, but also you as the City Council in terms of approval of what will probably be the final budget and participation not only of the city, but we will also reach out to the other stakeholders and talk to them about their potential involvement as well, being the county and the school district and other taxing entities. The most important pieces of that are essentially figuring out what those infrastructure costs and needs really are going to be, what the true remediation is potentially going to be, what the impact of the site is on development, as well as what level of incentives, if any, we want to offer as the city, as well as within partnership with our other stakeholders. So as we look at that, the message we've gone into it is we've just taken the first step, and it's a big step, but that's just the beginning of really sitting down and working with all of the stakeholders and partners that we see collaborating with, not only the property owners, but all of the other municipalities and government entities. And carrying out what you've heard today now is everyone's vision and goals and objectives for the area. So I hope that was a good enough softball pitch across home plate for Laura to knock out right now.
No pressure.
No pressure. My goodness. David, do you mind pulling up? Thank you. So when we've been looking at this from an economic development standpoint, we really see it as two economic nodes. That there's been a lot of talk today about north of 80, there's been talk about south of 80, but we really see it as one big economic engine. And in order for that to occur, we really need to make sure that we're being competitive on both sides. And so we've started to look at how can we, as the Department of Economic Development and RDA, be sure that we are creating two economic hubs and to make sure that there are competitive advantages at both hubs. And so right now, we're really fortunate that Union Pacific has an intermodal facility on the south side. But there's still some needs for infrastructure and upgrading of that infrastructure. And so we want to have a conversation in the future about whether or not a CRA is appropriate on the south side of 80. We've already moved forward on the north side of 80. And I think that what you've heard today is that the city is deeply committed to making sure that we're a good partner with the state and county. And the way that we can move forward doesn't necessarily mean that we need to take away our taxing authority or our land use control, but that there are plenty of opportunities. I always say that you never build a business without a business plan. And I think that that is really mission critical. We need to understand where we're heading, and that once we understand what we're trying to accomplish, the roles and responsibilities become very clear. And so the Salt Lake City Department of Economic Development would love to lead that conversation.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we still have some state partners in the room, and this map that you've put up and what you said just now is a interesting proposal that can hopefully segue into our future conversations with the state. But council members, do you have any questions, feedback, reactions? Yeah, Councilmember Kitchen.
Thank you all for being here. Looking at this map, the potential intermodal terminal number 2 is right where the landfill is. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Have you explored this? I mean, what might our pathway forward be if we were to determine that this is the best site for the hub? Can you talk to us about what that might look like and what steps we need to take?
Sure, we'd be happy to. So, we have looked at this in a couple of different ways. One, we have worked with the property owners to look at various sites. And really, from a moving forward standpoint, this really is the most economical and efficient. And we believe that by not starting to move the garbage that's out there and capping it instead is a much more efficient and thoughtful way to handle the remediation of the landfill site. So we're interested in pursuing an additional conversation. We are not committed to this as we don't own the property, but we would love to be part of a conversation moving forward.
And Laura, are there other scenarios around the country or worldwide that you know of that have executed an intermodal hub on top of a cap?
That's a great question, and I don't have that answer, but I will get you an answer.
Great. Anything else, council members? Well, there's a lot to chew on from
James.
Oh,
Well,
James,
I don't know if it's
please.
really, how do I say this without being offensive? But
Take a deep breath.
I'm really struggling here.
Say
Okay.
it, just say it very sweetly.
I don't know if I can do that.
He usually smiles while he says it
Paint
anyway.
is coming out. You gotta watch
Yeah.
I'm just so grateful for the thoughtful process that Salt Lake City has gone through. I mean, from start to finish, you look at this, the RDA and economic development, the coordination of information with all the bubble points pointing towards what we've done. I mean, from start to finish, I feel like for master planning process in a fast fashion, I feel like we have crossed all of our T's and dotted all of our I's, and we're at a point where we have stakeholders that are willing to play with us, and now we're being told how we should develop the property, right? And the landowners are being told. So I'm just hopeful that we are going to be as diligent as possible to make sure that Salt Lake City and its residents are really covered. And that's, for me, where we're at right now. And hopefully we can get the state and the county to go along with that.
Yep.
You
Very
did
good.
really well, James.
Yes, thank you. Great.
Mayor, thank you for being with us
Thank
all
you.
afternoon. Director Fritz, Danny,
Yes.
Tammy, thank you for all of your brains, and everyone else in our staff here at City Hall who have been working through the weekend and around the clock.
Yeah.
And thank you to our partners, our private owners who have also been contributing to these conversations. And for whatever state entities are listening, thank you for the invitation to continue this conversation. We are, as I said, 16 hands ready to lift and work. I don't have my boots on yet, but I'm putting my boots on.
Right.
So,
Well, and it's been so great, and you're absolutely right. The property owners have been working very closely. And the property owners on both sides of the freeway want to make sure we get this right, and I think we heard that today. And I think the message was well received, and I think we have some work to do. And hopefully some follow-up meetings will occur pretty quickly with the speaker and Francis,
yes.
Representative Gibson. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a time-sensitive or time-certain board appointment at 5:50, so we're going to take a break right now for the next 20 minutes. And we'll, actually, she's here? Great. Teresa, of course you're here. Come on up. Is Roger Boyer here? Come on. Come on up.
Come on up.
We might as well, and then perhaps you could have your evening.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll move ahead with item 10, and then we'll pause for item 11 until Mr. Boyer joins us. Teresa Foxley, you've been here all along.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend.
Pull that mic up.
Teresa Foxley with the Economic Development Corporation of Utah. Thank you for having me. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to participate in all of the discussion, but what I did was certainly interesting and would offer that if I can be of help in any way, me or my organization, we'd be happy to. So,
Great. Thank you. You're here for a different reason, though.
yes.
Yes.
And Mayor, do you want to do an introduction, or we?
Well, you know, since I've been in office, working with Teresa has been, I think, a very strong partnership. And I believe with all my knowledge and heart and soul that she cares about Salt Lake City, and that the work she does reflects the importance of the capital city and the role we play in the state of Utah. And that partnership has served us well, and I think having her kind of represent the state a little bit on the airport board could go a long way for us in collaborating.
Well, that integration is on the table.
Well, not
Conversationally
integration,
speaking.
but you know.
Conversationally speaking,
yeah.
that there are conversations to be had, clearly, as the state indicated, with the quadrimodal transportation and the importance of our international airport being a part of a state conversation. That's a reality, I think. So, council members, do we have any questions for Ms. Foxley? Councilmember Kitchen?
Thank you. I don't have a question, but I would like to mention that I am so excited to have Teresa serve on the airport board. I think she will bring an enormous amount of connections and support and knowledge about Salt Lake City and our overall economic picture, and I think she will be a great asset for Salt Lake. Obviously, the airport is our biggest physical asset. And so, you know, we have a $3.2 billion renovation underway with room for growth in the future. And so I just want to thank you for your interest and willingness to serve on this important board.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Kitchen, and I was absolutely delighted to have thrown my hat in the ring and to have been nominated by Mayor Biskupski. I truly enjoy working with the Salt Lake City team, whether it's the mayor, the council, the administrative staff. It's one of the finest in the state, and I think probably in the country. And after having served on the Mayor's Advisory Council for selecting Bill Wyatt, I can just say that experience for me was one that really illuminated a lot, and one that I wanted to learn more and to be able to help the airport as it goes through this important transition. So thank you.
Thanks. Councilmember Wharton.
Hello. Again, thank you for being here. We talked a little bit earlier, and I just wanted to ask you again and have you share some of what you shared with me. Today we had a lot of conversation about the city working with the state and what is the finding that proper balance and that proper role. How do you see yourself in that going forward, especially in this area of the city?
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity to answer that question, Councilmember Wharton. One of the things that I think makes our organization unique is that we have a number of both public and private entities that support us and that are a part of our organization, including both the city and the state. And so I think that in many ways we can serve as a good translating point between the two organizations, and that's what I would hope to bring to my service on the advisory board for the airport. So,
anyone else? Our airport board member Councilmember Rogers is quiet, so that's a good sign for you, Ms. Foxley.
Well, I was
Well,
just going
now.
to say, as Natalie's on her way out, very, very capable individual. We have another capable individual coming to fill her
Yeah,
shoe.
so great.
Great. All right, well, thank you. You need not be present to win, as our past chairs used to say, but your official appointment will happen at our formal meeting, but you should go home
Okay.
at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you for
thank you
being
very-
with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, no Roger Boyer in the room? Then we're going to recess until 5:55 on the dot. Thanks. to the work. We're on item 11, a board appointment, again, for the Airport Advisory Board of Roger Boyer. So if we could have Mr. Boyer join us. Any seat is yours. Thank you for being with us. There was quite a crowd earlier, but this doesn't mean to diminish the importance of the board appointment we're considering here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, for coming back to join us.
You're welcome.
Would you like to say anything as an introduction to Mr. Boyer's recommendation
Well,
here?
sure, thank you. One of the reasons I wanted to bring Mr. Boyer into the fold on the board was because of his background in the construction world, and I felt like having that perspective on the board would be extremely helpful to us throughout this rebuild or complete build of the new airport. So that's where I'm coming from on this.
Great. Mr. Boyer, you want to say a few words about your interest in serving on this board?
Thank you. Well, I was asked to serve. I wasn't soliciting it, but I'd be very happy to do it. I think the airport is a jewel of our state and an important asset, and huge dollars are being spent, obviously, and we've done quite a bit of development in our company, and I don't know if I can be of some assist as that goes along. I'm sure that everything's pretty much in place at this point, but as things unfold, there may be places that I could contribute a comment here or there. So I'd be happy to serve, and I've been a resident of Salt Lake my whole life and feel like I'm a community player here, so not here, don't have a big campaign speech, so that's it for me.
Well, board appointments are one of my favorite parts of this job, because we get to, we have the great privilege, really, of thanking our amazing residents for their willingness to volunteer in different capacities, sometimes outside of their normal day work area of interest. And so I thank you in that same way. And with great humility usually comes great wisdom when we're at these board appointments, and you've exercised the great humility, and we know well of your wisdom in this arena. So in the construction arena, particularly development side of things. And until this airport's done, I think that we will continue to need wisdom on the board and guidance on that project. It's an incredibly large project that we're undertaking, and it's not done yet. So, council members, any comments, questions? It's that easy sometimes.
I'm good. I mean, that's all from me.
Great.
Thanks.
Well, the advice and consent portion where we make this formal happens a little later in our evening, and you need not stay for that. We thank you for taking time out of your evening to come and meet us. And thank you for your willingness to serve.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you. Just in time, Representative Rebecca Chavez-Hauk, please come on up. You are item 12 as a board appointment for the Human Rights Commission. You are busy on the Hill. Did you have to leave a meeting in order to make it here with us?
No, it actually worked out really well. I thought I
Good.
was going to need to. We just never know what the schedule's going to look like
Sure.
from week to week, as many
Good.
of you know. But the way it worked out is I actually had a gap of time. So I thought this will work out great. So thank you for accommodating
Wonderful.
my squirrely schedule, but it actually worked out well. So I'm
We're
glad to be here with you all.
We're happy to be convenient.
Thanks.
Mayor, do you want to introduce us at all? And then we can ask.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think it's so obvious why I would want her
I want to give
help.
you the chance to praise our board appointments.
I know. I'm good. I think Rebecca is such a stellar community member and would be extremely helpful with the work that we are trying to do, and the depth of the work. You know, these foundational shifts that I'm looking for require some real expertise and diverse backgrounds to really help us do the deep dives we're trying to do. So that is why she is here.
There are many boards and commissions that we would be excited to appoint you to at the city, but we'll just do one tonight. And do you want to say anything about your interest in this particular one?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mayor, for considering my application. To be honest with you, I know that there, as of late, have been some concerns as to the trajectory of what would happen with the commission, where the commission could go. But I see this as a moment of great opportunity for the Human Rights Commission. The experience that I've had serving on other boards and commissions and in serving my community the way I have in the past few years shows me that when you serve as a commissioner, especially for a commissioner of the Human Rights Commission, that it is your role to serve as a conduit, that you are a two-way communicator. Not only are you trying to communicate the interests and concerns of diverse constituencies, many who are marginalized and don't even know where to start in terms of engaging in conversation with the city, but you're an ambassador also for the mayor's office and for the council and for all of the various departments and agencies that try to do the good work of the city. I think sometimes when we're appointed as commissioners, we come in with an agenda and we say, this is what we want to do, but that's not what I see my role being. My role is to facilitate. My role is to connect where the community is at, try to find that space. I often find that commissioners also, I'm not saying that this has necessarily happened in this case, but they will often defer to the staff and say, okay, staff, you're the one that needs to do this. We want you to do all this stuff and be off with you and go do your thing. But we are ambassadors, and so it's also our role. We're not supposed to just tell the staff what to do, but we're supposed to help the staff. So we're the ones that should be going to these events. We are the ones that are supposed to be the face of this city, of this mayor, of this council, in the context of community events, of hard discussions, which sometimes are difficult, but I think sometimes we can be that ballast to be able to, kind of right whatever ship might be lopsided one way or the other. So I'm hoping that in this new role, I can serve as that, and then I can help the other commissioners grow into that role of ambassador, of two-way convener, of someone that communicates to, but also communicates from. And to help the staff. It's not our role just to tell them what to do. It's our role to be that face. We are going to be the face of the city as commissioners in the community, in hard discussions, in celebrations, in communicating the direction and a vision of the mayor as well as the council to them, but also making sure that those often marginalized communities feel that they're being heard. So sometimes difficult discussions, and I realize that. I've been on the Hill for 11 years. Difficult discussions are the name of the game. But in a different venue and with also a great commission and chairs and others, and with your support, with the mayor's support, I think we'll do fine, and I'm happy to help and serve.
Thank you. Any comments?
I do. I have a comment.
Please.
I have to have a comment.
That's fine.
Here's the thing. You have got great friends in the city. You've got the mayor, you've got Jen Seelig, you've got Sandra Hollins, me. But you know what? What my mom would say, with friends like that, who needs enemies? You haven't even retired yet, and you've been put on the board.
I have to tell you that I have been fielding a lot of phone calls and messages over the last few months, and
We got to her first.
yeah, well, and it's. I'm a strong believer in serendipity, and I think opportunities are presented before us for a reason. And so that's where I really try not to say no unless if it's not resonating with me as to the reason why I should be saying no, then I feel that it always needs to be a yes, because there's a reason that I'm being called. And so that's where I'm at. I know I'm going to be busy, and there'll be a period of transition, and I've had that conversation with the mayor and her staff about that as I move from my current role into role of citizen. and role of sole constituent, sole citizen, not just a representative. I'm looking forward to moving into that space again. I missed it. I've loved my work on the Hill. I've enjoyed working with all of you in so many capacities, but I'm actually very anxious. I've told people I'm kind of anxious to capture my soul again. And part of that is moving back into advocacy. I miss advocacy so much. And when you're representing a group, you don't get to really do that in the same way. It's a different role, as you all know. You have all been faced with kind of being in that space. And so I am looking for moving back into that space as advocate for the city, for the community, for the constituencies, and to try some new ideas. I mean, I think, especially in particular, the work that I did, oh my gosh, 7 years ago as part of the CEDAW working group. I think that's something I'm very excited about, maybe having more time to help out with and helping that flourish. We did so much great work there, and I'm really anxious to reinvigorate that. So,
Yay. Thank you.
I'm ready.
Thank you, Rebecca Chavez Houck,
You're
soon-to-be
welcome.
commissioner. There's a selfie happening.
All right, thank you so much,
Not
Council.
Stick around. We'll formalize this in our formal meeting at 7 o'clock.
That
You don't
sounds
need
wonderful.
to be here to win. You
All righty.
can go home.
I'm going to go grab a bite to eat and off to an evening meeting. So thank you again
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your willingness. Okay, we have a state legislative briefing by our national lobbyists. And I want to just say, you come on up, Jen and Len, if you're both coming up, please. We do have a executive session that we need to get to, so I think that our timing's probably until, you think we need 30 minutes? I'd say that we have 15, 20 minutes with you right now. Is that sufficient?
We actually have an express version of this.
Fantastic. Thank you for
We're
coming.
delighted to be here, and first of all, thank you for having us, and congratulations to Councilmember Wharton, Councilmember Fowler for joining the team, and to all the council members. To my right is Jen Covino. Jen is deeply integrated in all of our work for Salt Lake City. You know her from her memos and grant opportunity activities, and I thought it was about time that she came out here. It's her first trip to Salt Lake City, and I think she's had a very educational meeting and also managed to spend some money at City Creek. So,
Absolutely.
So we're in good shape on that. So we are so proud to not only work for Salt Lake City, but to have been here for most of this afternoon, listening to your very important deliberations. It seemed to me that you'd accomplished more this afternoon than Washington has in the entire year. So congratulations on that. And you're all doing great work. Salt Lake City is renowned for its innovation and accomplishments, and is such a great calling card for us in D.C. So we know you'll continue to work in that regard. We're delighted also that the mayor has emerged as a real leader among mayors in both Washington and around the country. As an example, we just spent 4 days with her in D.C. at the U.S. Conference of Mayors winter meeting, and as I mentioned, she's pointing the way to mayors for a lot of issues, including energy, environment, and sustainability. So we're delighted about that. I want to get right into just a number of real quick issues. There's 5 that I want to mention to you that I think are of importance to the city: the budget, immigration, infrastructure, tax reform, and the environment. The budget is literally happening right while we're talking this evening. For fiscal 18, there was a continuing resolution that expires on Thursday. The House this afternoon passed an extension of that until March 23. The President, about 2 o'clock this afternoon Eastern Time, told a group that was meeting in the White House that he wanted a shutdown, that the shutdown would be great, that he was looking forward to a shutdown if the continuing resolution did not include any money for the wall or other border security, and it clearly is not on this short-term extension. That just gives you an example of how difficult it is to work with this White House that doesn't typically engage local government leaders for opinions, does not noticeably have much local government expertise among their appointees. And so we will probably, despite the president's rhetoric, end up with a continuing resolution that goes until March, and then we'll have to settle out some of the immigration and security issues, which I'll mention in just a second. The good news, though, on the budget, and this is a real important point, is that the administration's budgets have been awful. Eliminations, major cuts, all across the board in our core programs like Community Development Block Grant. The good news is that there's been an emergence in the Hill of strong leadership on the part of both Democrats and particularly Republican appropriators who understand these programs, have been around them for years, helped create them, and they were not about to get rid of them just because President Trump was proposing that they do. So while we're in a sort of a twilight zone in terms of when they finish the fiscal 18 budget, at least we know that when it finally gets done, most of our program levels are going to be pretty good. Immigration, of course,
Lynn,
is...
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, can I jump in really quick on budget? What are you hearing on earmarks? Because they had some chatter about that earlier this year.
Thank you, Councilman. I was going to mention that towards the end. It's remarkable that it is in the 7 years since we last had earmarks. They ended in fiscal 2011. We are now closer than ever before to having them brought back. One of the interesting things is most of the members who were involved in earmarks, both in a positive and a negative way over the years, are now gone, because you get about a 20% turnover in membership of Congress every 2 years. So there's a whole cadre of the class of 2012 and 14 and 16 that say, hey, we were not part of any difficulties before, and we would like to be able to direct earmarks. So they're being taken very seriously. There have been some hearings. They're trying to figure out ways that they can bring them back with more specific criteria and safeguards. As you all know, that Salt Lake City, through our entire congressional delegation, did very well in earmarks over the years. So we would welcome them to return as one additional source of funding that we could bring to the city.
Thank you.
What I did want to say on immigration is that the president has laid out 4 standards for agreeing to an immigration bill. He wants DACA with a path to citizenship. He wants $25 billion for the wall and for other border security. He wants sharp limits on the family reunification program, and he wants the visa lottery to be replaced with a merit-based system. Interestingly, you're seeing all across the Congress a lot of new efforts towards bipartisanship, because I think they realize they've got to work better together in order to combat what's going on in the White House. We have a group of House and Senate members, about 45 of them, they're called the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House side. On the Senate side, they're the Common Sense Caucus, and they've come up with some very good ideas: legalization of DACA with a path to citizenship, border security, including the wall, but of course nowhere near $25 billion. Eliminating the diversity visa lottery, and also making some reforms to family reunification. So far, the White House has been tepid to their proposals, so we'll have to see what happens there. Infrastructure is something that I think is going to be very significant for our year. The president has proposed a $1.5 trillion plan. Here's 2 or 3 important things to know about that, and we're going to get more information from the White House when they officially announce it in a week or two. The $1.5 trillion over 10 years is really $200 billion over 10 years, except it may not even be that, because the $200 billion that they are eventually going to propose will be made up of budget cuts in other programs. So, I think we have to have modest expectations in terms of what to expect financially from the administration's proposal. The other really bad thing about what the administration is proposing is, instead of the traditional 80-20 split for major infrastructure projects, 80 federal, 20 local or other non-federal, the administration is going to propose 20-80, 20% federal, 80% local or private sector. That's not going to fly very well, but the good news on this is that the administration will make a proposal. It will be a bad proposal, but I think Congress will then get to work in a bipartisan way in the House and Senate and may end up giving us an infrastructure program towards the end of the year that would be far better than anything that the administration has proposed. One other issue is tax reform, and we just came out of the most remarkable experience, and we can certainly credit Senator Hatch with important aspects of it. 50 days from the time the administration proposed the tax reform to the time the president signed it on his desk. And we have both winners and losers in the tax reform bill. It wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been. The House bill that they put together was just awful. The Senate bill modified that to a great extent. So we retained historic preservation tax credits, even though the House tried to get rid of them. We retained new market tax credits, even though the House tried to get rid of them. We retained private activity bonds, even though the House tried to get rid of them. We kept the ability to deduct state and local taxes from federal taxes, but there's a new limit. It used to be unlimited. The new limit is $10,000. The good news, if it is good news in this sense, is that the average state and local tax deduction for people in Salt Lake County who itemize is $8,850. So you'll have a large group of folks within the county who will not be hurt by this limitation. Similarly, we still will be able to deduct mortgage interest, but the mortgage that you can deduct was reduced from $1 million of a total mortgage down to $750,000. We completely lost advanced refunding, which means that you can no longer refinance municipal bonds on a tax-free basis. That's something that's going to have to be fixed, because I think when they see what the implications of that is on a year-in, year-out basis, you're going to see it's vastly going to increase the cost of borrowing for most municipalities. So hopefully we can fix that up again. And we got a brand new program called Qualified Opportunity Zones. The governor gets to designate these zones where you have census tracts with at least 25% poverty within those census tracts. Businesses that will locate or expand in there will be able to have limited or excused capital gains tax for certain of their activities. So the mayor's team is working, I know, very closely with the governor's office in terms of the designation of those. And then finally, environment. That's another area that's just been very tough, in terms of what the administration has done. The one thing about the environment to remember is that although a lot of the news coverage of the administration is about their ongoing battles with Congress, when it comes to the environment, so much of what they can do and have done is done on the basis of executive authority, just signing their names to particular things. So, without any involvement from Congress, the president removed the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accords, set in motion the suspension of and withdrawal eventually of the Clean Power Plan, opened up ANWR to drilling, opened up the outer continental shelf to drilling as well, withdrew the waters of the United States regulation. Of course, we know about bears' ears, and then with you can call it their special kind of math for every new regulation that you have now in Washington, environment and everything else, 2 regulations have to be retired, so it's a 2-for-1 thing. So there's 5 areas that we're dealing with, all of which have a very significant impact on what Salt Lake City is doing. I'd like to turn it over briefly to Jen just to give you a quick overview on grant opportunities.
Hi there, and thanks for having us tonight. It's a great opportunity to be able to be with you here in person. I appreciate it. Just in the interest of time, I had outlined several grant opportunities in different issue areas that I will hold off on a number of them. Happy to follow up with you and your staff in the months ahead as the federal agencies prepare to roll out their notices of funding opportunity for fiscal year 2018, once Congress hopefully passes the remainder of the budget for this fiscal year. Generally speaking, a lot of the federal agencies have been behind schedule when we're looking at normal calendar years because they don't have a fully appropriated program to administer. But just to touch on some of the different issue areas where there is a lot of robust federal funding for, to support your efforts around homelessness, combating the opioid epidemic, supporting your law enforcement and your first responders. There's a number of different grant opportunities. Happy to touch base with your staff in the months ahead if any of those issue areas are a priority to you. But on infrastructure, just looking ahead to what you and your partners will hopefully set out to accomplish in the months and years ahead, there are a number of infrastructure investments that the federal government currently administers that are not dependent on the administration's new proposals. These are programs that are authorized through fiscal year 2020 under the FAST Act that was passed in December 2015 in the final months of the Obama administration. The first grant opportunity I'd like to highlight for you is the Infrastructure for Rebuilding America grant program that's administered by the U.S. Department of Transportation. Basically, the purpose of this program is to help build America's crumbling infrastructure. There's a priority focus on goods movement. And DOT will award grants of at least $25 million for large projects. Large projects are those that have a total project cost of at least $100 million. And then they will also award small project grants of at least $5 million for smaller projects. And eligible project activities will be highway freight projects that are carried out on the National Highway Freight Network, highway and bridge projects carried out on the National Highway System, freight projects that are intermodal or rail projects, and any other project within the boundaries of a public or private freight rail, water, intermodal facility, or a surface transportation infrastructure project necessary to facilitate direct intermodal interchange, transfer, or access into or out of facilities. So this may align well with your work in the Northwest Quadrant in the future. Another opportunity that lives on through our continuing resolutions process is the Tiger program, which has been popular here in Salt Lake City in the past. Again, eligible projects are road or bridge projects, public transportation projects, intermodal facilities, port infrastructure investments, and other intermodal projects. This year, approximately $500 million worth of funding was available for grants of $5 to $25 million each, and we expect that more funding will be available once Congress authorizes the remainder of the budget.
Jen, do you imagine that an inland port would qualify for that port grant?
For the infra grants, absolutely.
Okay.
And I'm happy to work with you in the months ahead on determining the scope and what activities would qualify. They're actually pretty varied, and just looking at what the cost might be in the future, DOT warmly welcomes any projects that are far in excess of $100 million. This administration wants to prioritize leveraging as its discretionary grant criteria. So the more non-federal resources you're able to bring to the table to bear, whether it's private investment or state or local match, they're going to seek out those projects for that program.
Great.
And just a footnote on infrastructure, I know that the mayor and all of you are considering some activity with respect to sales tax, with respect to bonds. Those kinds of things put you in a leadership position because even though we hope not to have an 80 local, 20 federal match, probably the era of the old 80-20 is over. So the more resources that we can bring to the table, probably the more competitive we will be for whatever federal resources are out there.
And just to let you know, with the infra grant in particular, the federal share can cover up to 60% of total project costs. You can take another 20% of the total project cost from other federal resources, and then it's at least 20% local match per the statutory requirements. However, once again, the administration would like to see overmatch in those cases.
So I'm interested in the Tiger grant as well, and if maybe there's an we just passed a transit master plan back in December, and so maybe we can explore if there's an opportunity for us to apply for funding there.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So just to let you know, we're probably still a few months out from them conducting another solicitation. The FY 2017 applications are still pending, so that gives us a little bit of time for planning on the local side.
So in summary, our work is enhanced by the great work that you do here. So just we hope and know you'll continue to do that, and we'll do our best to try to match up all of your local efforts with the resources that are available. It is a very unsettling time in Washington, but we're hoping that we'll continue to have the resources and good folks to work with up there, including many of the folks in our congressional delegation. So we hope this wasn't too whirlwind, and if there's a moment, we'd be very pleased to take any additional questions. We know you've got a busy evening ahead of you.
Councilmember Johnston, then Councilmember Kitchen.
Sure, thank you very much. Now Councilmember Kitchen and I heard about the area, the Opportunity Zone. That was a grant, it's a funding essentially for tax credit. But it's on the desk of probably governors at this point. Is that correct? They have until March to make a determination?
31, right.
Have we had any conversation locally? David's
yes. Yeah, and that was one of the things, and I should have mentioned, we've been here since yesterday morning. Actually came in Sunday night, so I had great opportunity to talk with David and the team all throughout City Hall, and they're very much on top of that, and have conversations, are having conversations with the governor's office, and no one, of course, can predict exactly how these things will turn out, but certainly one would presume that at least one of the designations that the governor would make would be within this area. So we're very hopeful on that.
Thanks.
You didn't mention LIHTC when you were talking about tax credit or tax reform. Is there any changes there?
With LIHTC, fortunately, and I think probably Senator Hatch gets a little credit for that as well. LIHTC was never threatened. So we have it. It was in the House bill, it was in the Senate bill, it was even in the administration bill, so we're in good shape on that. So, and again, I think, probably, especially after the 2018 elections, a lot of this stuff may be revisited as well.
There's been some impact with the volume cap, though, but luckily, from what I've heard, because of just the hotness of the market here, basically the dollar value is fluctuating between 95 cents to $1.15 with those tax credits, which is pretty stable compared to other markets where there's been a little bit more volatility. Hopefully that'll even out, and as Len said, get addressed in any corrections bill.
And one of the things we have to look at is with corporate taxes having been reduced from 35 to 21, is that tax credit as attractive to certain companies as it used to be?
Just two quick questions. Who is working on, or who is interested in addressing the tax-exempt municipal refinancing? Anybody that you can point to, and what can we do as a municipality to support?
Basically, all of the intergovernmental realm will be affected by that. I mean, the city, I would assume the county, also school districts and other units of local government who utilize that financing are being affected. I heard one school district that had used advance refunding for $10 million worth of savings, which, for their programming purposes, they'll have to backfill.
Just let us know if there's anything we can do to advocate for that.
Yeah, and it really came down to almost to an exchange kind of thing, because in the end they said, look, municipal government, we saved historic preservation, we saved new markets, we saved private activity bonds, we saved a lot of other things. There is no constituency that really responds to quote unquote advanced refundings, and so we're just going to have to fight that one on another day.
The last thing I want to ask about COPS grants. Is there anything there?
Yeah, so one of the things, there may be some coalition building in the weeks and months ahead, because we're hearing that President Trump will once again seek to eliminate COPS funding in his proposed federal budget. However, the program enjoys a lot of bipartisan support in Congress. There's a letter that was being circulated today with 161 House members of both parties in support of COPS funding. And just to let you know, there's the typical COPS hiring grants that'll come out, which provide up to $125,000 of the salary over 3 years for your local law enforcement positions. There's also the community-oriented policing development grants that are available. And one of the things that I'd like to draw your attention to very briefly, those grants, this year the COPS office did $11 million worth of grants on a variety of different issue areas that they like to focus on. There's also micro grants that are available. The larger grants typically vary from $200,000 to $800,000 each. The micro grants are about $75,000. And one of the priority areas this year was de-escalation for folks who are experiencing severe mental health distress, engaging in learning de-escalation. Also, there are a lot of new resources available to law enforcement around combating the opioid epidemic. So I'd love to follow up with you along those lines.
Thank you.
Jen, on the community-oriented police development grants.
CPD, yeah.
Thank you. Is there a match that you're aware of?
So the match for that, sorry, I believe
25%.
Thank you.
either 25 or 50%. The micro grants may not have a cost share though, because it's only 12 months.
And they are micro.
Yeah, they're only $75,000 each.
Jen Covino, Len Simon, you do an amazing job for us. And you have maintained relationships for us that ultimately bring us greater opportunity. Thank you. And I really like this format of ending with grant opportunities because it feels really empowering and hopeful to think about potential.
Well, and also, you know, and philosophically, it helps as well because it, you know, if you turn on, you know, certain news channels, or you know, you will think that the world is just bursting apart in Washington, and there's a lot of noise there, but there's a lot of stuff where people are working to try to hold things together, and core funding for urban programs is a high priority there, and some of the things that Jen was talking about is a good example of, you know, a year into this administration, and since we know we're going to be in pretty good shape once they finalize FY18, 2 years into this administration, our core portfolio of urban programs is going to be intact.
Yeah,
So.
and those are being administered by the same career level officials who have administered those programs, you know, throughout their history. So you may actually have working relationships already with a lot of these folks. So there's good continuity there that we enjoy.
The career professionals who are enduring, you know, some certain kind of pressures within their agencies from political appointees are also the unsung heroes of the last year or so.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you so
flying
much.
out to
And we
be
look
with
forward
us.
to any council members that can make the trip for NLC in March. We look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council members, we have a closed session scheduled. There's a highlighted section at the bottom if anyone wants to make a motion for the specific reason that we're going into executive session.
I move that we move into, or we enter closed session for attorney-client matters.
Third.
I have a motion by Councilmember Kitchen, a second by Councilmember Rogers. We'll roll call this, starting with Councilmember Rogers. Councilmember Fowler? Yes. Wharton?
Yes.
Kitchen?
Yes.
Yes.
Johnston, and I'm a yes. And if you don't know that you're supposed to be in this room, please exit. Thank you. And council members, if you haven't had dinner, then go ahead and grab it, and we will reconvene at 7 o'clock for our formal meeting.